So let's talk about Jung and the arts, because it seems like a lot of what he has to say actually revolves around the arts. I mean, this paragraph happens to be the very last paragraph in this book, and it's Marie-Louise von France, who's the author of this particular section, and she says, creative ideas, in my opinion, show their value in that, like keys, they help to unlock hitherto unintelligible connections to facts and thus enable man to penetrate deeper into the mystery of life. I'm convinced that Jung's ideas can serve in this way to find and interpret new facts in many fields of science and also in everyday life, simultaneously leading the individual to a more balanced, more ethical, and wider conscious outlook. If the reader should feel stimulated to work further on the investigation and assimilation of the unconscious, which always begins by working on oneself, the purpose of this introductory book would be fulfilled. So she's really talking about how creativity cuts through and makes you think about things in different ways. And I think that that's the sort of the crime of the last 30 or 40 years in education, where arts programs have just been thrown out of the school system, basically. And I think that the people, the rationalists, that think all you have to do is, all you want is to teach people to read and write and add to the little multiplication. And so as long as they can balance their checkbook, then they can go out and work. Except the problem is they can't anymore. And the problem is India doesn't think that, China doesn't think that. So our children are falling behind. And so I don't know how we compete in the next 50 years. What I see is that when I'm doing art of some sort, whatever it is, whether it's painting or writing or sculpting, or drawing sand, making sandcastles, whatever it is, my life seems to work better. I don't know why, it's a mystery, but nonetheless it does. So I know in my heart that we need human beings and American human beings who can connect with the arts, and not just the intelligentsia, but we need all kinds of people. I wanted to mention this book. Joseph Campbell, who was sort of a second generation Jungian, although he rarely admitted it, but nonetheless,
I hate it when they do that.
Well,
or don't do that.
I'll tell you, for most of the 90s, I thought of Joseph Campbell as my guru. Okay, and the reason I did was because I had read Man and His Symbols, which is this book that we're reading now, but I was afraid that Jung's main books were really about clinical practice. And so I never really got into them. And, I said, I don't want to be a psychologist, so I never got into them, but I read all these peripheral books, right? And I got very interested in Joseph Campbell's life because he had a biography written about him called Fire in the Mind, a very good book, and very interesting life that he had, actually. But he wrote this book, or actually it was 4 books. It was 4 volumes called The Masks of God. And during most of his career, when he was working at Sarah Lawrence College, he lived in a 2-room apartment with his wife. And so he sat on his dining room table for 12 years and pumped this book out. And it's actually 4 books, Masks of God. The first one is Primitive Mythology, then Oriental Mythology, and then Western Mythology. And the 4th volume is Creative Mythology. And creative mythology is really, to me, the most valuable for an artist, because he really goes through and talks about how archetype connects up with your audience. In the biography of Picasso, he says, well, when I was 13, I could paint like Goya. Then I had to learn how to paint like Picasso. But the thing is, not everybody can paint a perfect picture. I did this explanation of my art show that I did in 2005, an artist explanation, another place exploring numinous eroticism in Jungian archetype.
Bring them in.
I left a few samples for you in the Dropbox. What I wanted to emphasize here was the first sentence here. You will not find a straight line in my exhibition this evening. Not only none of the straight lines are straight, but even the curved lines do not have regular curves. Instead, they're rather squiggly lines. That's all right because the subconscious mind engages and adjusts for disorder and imagery. So you will see the lines as straight and the curves as regular regardless, or at least that's how you will remember them. In my opinion, this is a partial explanation for the power of Jackson Pollock's work. He intentionally made no recognizable image, but that did not stop the audience's minds from trying to adjust to regularize an image, so the subconscious mind becomes engaged in the viewing of his work, evoking emotion and intensity.
So it's a very different experience. Is that the one with the hand up in the right hand corner?
I don't think there's a hand in it. Maybe there is to you.
He actually put his hand up.
Oh, he did. Okay. Well, that's a story I don't know. But anyway, the original of this piece I came across in the Boston Museum of Art at an exhibit of modern artists. Go ahead and pass it. And I've seen pictures of Jackson Pollock's work for years, and it just did nothing for me. I said, okay, so any kindergartner could do this.
So you didn't go through the 60s the same way I did.
No, I didn't. Yep.
Looks pretty random to me.
And looking at that printout of it, it doesn't do a lot for me either. Although,
There's a little scale here.
pardon?
The scale is not quite the same.
No, but in the Boston Museum of Art, it was 20 feet wide and 10 feet high. And
I don't know why that would change anything.
well, what it changed was I walked into the room and I looked at it, and all of a sudden I just burst into tears. And to this day I don't know why, but it's something.
Emotional reaction.
Yeah, and what I think is that Pollock successfully transmitted a message from beyond the grave, directly from his unconscious to my unconscious. And I don't know what the message was consciously. I'm still working it out, but I've heard of people going to art museums and getting very emotional and tears running down their faces. Has that ever happened to you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've been to a lot of art museums and art galleries. Artist friends.
Well, it never happened to
My
me.
were artists.
Okay.
That's a story over.
Well, it never happened to me before, and actually it happened right after I saw this piece, which I'll show you. Okay, so this is by Robert Thieren, and it's called Under the Table, and this was also on display in the Boston Museum of Art for that show, and it's a three times normal size table and chairs. That's all. But you walk into that and you walk under that table, and oh my God, you instantly feel like you're 3 years old again. Mm-hmm. Instantly. It's amazing. And the overwhelming emotion of it is just shocking. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. But
Well, I've had a lot of different experiences with it. But like I was saying earlier, the Rothko, that was the first time I understood a Rothko when I was in Savannah and I saw it.
I'm still having trouble with Rothko. What do you see? Tell me about Rothko.
Well, it's an experience. I can try to reduce it to some other, to a language, but
Yeah.
what I remember seeing, and it's not much, because I really have to be there and spend
Right.
20 years now, but you would see the patches of color, and so I'd do the visual thing, I'd let the sensory thing happen, I'd let things begin to float and so forth. But I saw an interplay between the elements that struck me as really funny.
Really, what?
Funny.
Funny,
Yeah.
huh?
And I thought I would never have expected that from a Rothko. I mean,
Interesting,
this guy killed
yeah.
himself, you know?
Right.
And I just thought, and it just, everything seemed so serious, and here was something that actually had humor to it. And how it has humor, I can't exactly explain, except because I can't remember it as well. But it's sort of like Tangled Up in Blue. What does that mean to you?
Tangled Up in Blue?
Yeah, like the Dylan song. What does Tangled Up in Blue mean to you? Well, to me, it means you're thinking too much.
Okay.
So, and then, so there was some element of blue and combination with some other colors, maybe, I don't know what, but their relationship to one another to me was just, it just struck me as funny.
Yeah.
And but it made sense, but not in like a full-blown verbal sense. It was like at a deeper level, like
Right.
it was playing, the bass notes are down there, and up here you could dance around with all sorts of melodies and stuff. But with these bass notes, it had to be something funny up here.
Yeah, I mean, the only Rothko I can remember is seeing it at in the National Gallery, and they had a Rothko show one time, and you walked into this room, and he had these big pieces that were black on black, and and I just felt very depressed. So the fact that you
The
say
end of his life stuff.
he committed suicide doesn't surprise me, because I walked in and saw that, and I said, oh my God, I just feel overwhelmed by that.
Why do some artists get in that trap? I've
What,
heard
in
people.
the suicide trap.
Yeah, the depression and all that.
To this artist, this engineer who didn't understand art. I worked in Chicago at an antique store. I was managing it, and it was an actual Victorian house right on Belmont. So it was in the middle of the city, but it was what was left of something else, and other things had been built around it. But anyway, so I'm sitting on the front steps having a cigarette, because I was young, 20-something, and a homeless guy comes up, and he's walking around just talking to people, veering away from him. It's just word salad. Well, he sits down next to me, and he sort of talks word salad, and I figured out what he was doing. It was sort of like concrete poetry. He was just using, you were talking earlier about Japanese stuff. He was just using images and clustering them together to make meanings. So he'd go from one cluster to another cluster to another cluster, and I caught on, so I started talking back. And he got to laughing, and we got to talking, and I was understanding him, and he was going, wow, he understands me.
It's like meeting James Joyce.
And then one of the store owners from the place, next door came out and he ran the guy off, and he says, you're scaring all the people away.
Oh, that's funny.
But the point was, to him was, you can be an artist and not know what art is. So in other words, this guy was really a performance artist, but he didn't know it.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
So you could, and you've got a lot of people who make art that don't have a clue. Sometimes I wonder about Van Gogh, because I wonder if he really knew what art was. But I guess he did. But
Oh, he definitely did. Oh my God.
well, I don't know, because I think a lot of what we call art is actually more design or illustration than anything. So
Sorry.
there's elements. That's another story, I guess.
Well, I'm sorry. I don't understand the distinction you're making vis-a-vis Van Gogh. Van Gogh.
Well,
And
because he was sort of going insane. And
Yes,
so
he
he
was-
was still making art. So did he really know he was making art, or was he just managing his insanity?
Oh, I think he knew he was making art. If you have to read the letters of Vincent van Gogh, okay, you have read it?
Yeah.
Well, that
The ones to Theo?
yeah, the
Uh-huh.
letters to Theo. I mean, but they go right up to his death nearly. I mean, they cover the entire 10 years that he was painting, and you know, the thing that amazes me about his entire oeuvre, in fact, is the fact that Theo's wife kept everything together, because it's a huge amount of paintings. It's like 1,000 paintings that were done. Okay, and Theo kept sending him art supplies, and a lot of these letters are, you know, send me this many yellows and this many reds and that sort of thing, and you know, I want canvases that are this size, etc. So he was basically ordering art supplies from Theo, and Theo was working in a museum, and he was an art dealer, or no, not a museum. He was an art dealer. Okay, so he was basically supporting Vincent, and but I didn't have the sense that he wasn't an artist.
Oh
Okay?
no, I didn't say that. I just said you don't have to know what art is to be an artist.
Oh, that's right. Okay, and so in answer to John's question, I think a lot of artists get through the transcendent function. A lot of them do it with alcohol or drugs, and then they lose control, because if
You mean they're using alcohol and drugs to express their art?
they're using alcohol or drugs to punch through
Oh.
to the unconscious.
Okay.
See, because I understand it and I've experienced it, I have no need to do that. I have plenty of contact with my unconscious.
But see,
Right.
until the Romantics came along, I don't think that was a big issue. I think they were just when the Romantics came along, they were sort of like the '60s. They were suddenly pushing their consciousness, and they wanted to explore that stuff. But prior to that,
Right.
I wonder if they
Artists were just doing.
You said lose control. They were losing control of.
Well, the ones that
Their
commit
access.
suicide or become alcoholics or what have you.
Jackson Pollock.
Well, Jackson Pollock is a good example, yeah.
So
'Cause
is
he
it
did that.
because of the crutch, or is it because of what they're seeing in their unconscious? That
I think
is
it's
unfavorable?
their unconscious taking over, and they lose control of it, because it's a gift. I mean, think about writer's block. Okay, if you're a novelist and you can't get through to your unconscious, it's not easy to write a novel if you're not connected to your unconscious. I'm sure that that's true. I mean, the novel that I wrote came from my unconscious, but you know, I was having a everyday life too during that period, and I wasn't drinking to get that experience, right? Or I wasn't using drugs to get that experience. But I think a lot of them, you know, they have an experience for a period of time. I mean, maybe you can tell me, Bill, you know, do you, as an artist, I mean, you know, is there a time when you're connected up with it, it's really flowing for you, and then it's really flowing for you, and all of a sudden you feel like you can't get it anymore?
Well, I'm doing a lot of writing now. I know
Yeah.
that when I write, I was trying to figure it out. Some days it just wears me out. I'm just dead tired.
Mm-hmm.
And other days it energizes me.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what's going on? Because neither day do I have writer's block. It's just some days it's just a slog, you know, it's hard. And then some other days it's like things just pop along my
Yeah.
But what was it you first said? I was gonna,
About the
I
transcend.
know when I was younger, I was always really gifted.
Mhm.
I could always remember things. And
Right.
You give me something, and they say make something with this, and they go, oh my god, and I go, what?
Mhm.
But what they were going oh my god about was photorealism, and I didn't like photorealism, and to me that was slogging.
Right.
That was not popping along.
Mhm.
And so I just sort of quit for a while, and then I went into film and photography. Did that for a while because why go to all that trouble?
Right. You got photorealism right there. I just yesterday, I think, watched the mythology of Star Wars. It's very good because of how he describes how he creates all these environments and how he picks his costuming and that sort of thing for different alien species, and how hard it is to make a rule, because if you make a rule and you're going to do 9 films, you're stuck with it. So like he made a rule that there was sound in space in Star Wars 4, which was actually the first movie, and so he's stuck with this rule that there's sound in space, which there isn't. But I get for dramatic
Creating a world.
license, absolutely.
It was a different part of the universe.
The other thing was
There you go.
when I finally went through the film and photography, came back out, and went into computer animation, where everything was rigid. I mean, I had to build things and model stuff, and so it was really difficult for me to, again, here I was going back to this, everything in computer graphics and animation was photorealism. I mean, there was slick, mirrory surfaces and all this other stuff.
Right.
So I had to find my way through that, and that's where the art part came in, because I started playing with the materials. I didn't have, it wasn't, this is the difference between art and design. Design, you got a problem space, you just come up with a solution, right?
Right.
So you create a problem space, okay, here's what we got to do, now here's the solution, or you go over to art, you play with the materials. You go, oh, let's push this paint here, push that there. Wait, something's beginning to emerge, and then you've got art.
Yeah.
Well, doing that with computers was tough, and the way I found out, the way I did it, was I was always working from what I call the margins. I get mixed up with Derrida here, but anyway, I worked from the edges. I never worked directly on the image. I would run the images through processes and do sorts of layering stuff, and I would keep doing that, and so I begin to tease areas out of it, and that's how I mixed it. And it was really, I've never seen anything like it since, but the thing was, it all won lots of international awards back in its day.
Wow.
So,
Did you see the pressy for the new movie about Van Gogh? There's a movie coming out that's going to be animation, but it's all oil paintings. So every frame of this movie is oil paintings, and they hired 100 artists to paint in the style of Van Gogh, Van Gogh. I keep thinking of him as Van Gogh, but it's Van Gogh. Anyway, Vincent. And so they took some of his oil paintings and they animated it and made a movie and a plot out of it. Had a few other things to share. I think I did this before I had other participants here. So anyway, archetype and art. So the archetypes, male and female, and David and Aphrodite of Rhodes. And so these, why is the human figure so prominent in art? Is because it's archetypal. And,
those girls.
pardon?
I like those girls.
Right. And
He's not a bad. He doesn't cut a bad figure either.
I saw a carved perfect nude in the Victoria and Albert Museum that I'll never forget. It was perfect, absolutely perfect, a form of a woman.
I'm sure.
And it baffled me that anyone could
Well,
could do that.
the Greeks were doing this 2,000 years ago. I mean, Aphrodite of Rhodes there was actually found in the harbor of Rhodes, Greece, about 100 years ago. But they figured out that it had been there since the 1st century. It had been actually in the water since the 1st century. And Rhodes is a very interesting island because the archaeologists have found 3,000 sculptures that are that quality. And you know, one of the things that someone was saying, it may have been Campbell, is that anything can become a symbol. And so this particular piece became a symbol for my family because my father happened to be on a ship during the Lebanon crisis in 1956. And one of the port calls that they made on his ship, which was just a big refrigerator, wasn't a destroyer or anything cool like that. He was he was the grocery store for the fleet. But anyway, one of the port calls that they made on his ship was in Rhodes, and so he bought a copy of this sculpture of Aphrodite of Rhodes, and he brought it home. And my mother was in her mid-20s at that time, right? And he'd been away for 3 months, and this precious statue he brings back as a gift. She puts it on the telephone stand in the hall, and my brother, who was like a year and a half old, or a year old maybe, is crawling, and he crawls over and he yanks the table, knocks it down, and it breaks into 1,000 pieces.
It didn't hit him in the head at least.
No, it didn't hit him in the head. And my mother was totally crushed, absolutely crushed. And I still remember this. I mean, it was a very emotional moment in my early life, so I remember this even though I was like 3. And so that night, she stayed up all night putting it back together, gluing it back together. And she got it back so it was more or less back together, right? She put it up on the telephone stand again.
Like Frankenstein.
And the very next day, I actually remember my brother crawling over to it, crawling over to the telephone stand. I remember seeing him do that. And I was thinking, no! Too late. Blown away.
Just going
again.
over there going, I thought I did this yesterday.
Right.
It was meant to be.
So then in 2004, Debbie and I were going to go to Greece, and it was the Olympic year for, it was the Greek Olympic year. And my mother says, well, you know, could you look around and see if you could find this statue? And this is 54 years later, right? But she's remembering this, and she wants a replacement of this statue. And she describes it as a woman combing her hair. And that's not exactly what it is, but that's what she described, right? And so while we were in Athens, I went into this curio shop that had lots of sculptures like that, and I didn't see it in any of the sculptures, but I described it to the guy, and he said, "Oh, I think I have that." And he pulls out a book, which is like a catalog of these things, and he says, "Is this the one?" And he showed me this picture. And I said, yeah, that's definitely the one. And so he had 2 of them. I bought them both and brought them back.
One for your brother to break and one for mom.
Well, one for mom and one for Deb. But I think I have them both now because my mom died. But Deb has it on her dresser. But I mean, it still is quite an emotional thing for me even to talk about it.